Welcome everybody. Today in 2026 it's a very special year for us because we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Liechtenstein Family Foundation. The Polish Family Foundation, on the other hand, will celebrate the third anniversary, and for this occasion we have invited two very special guests from Liechtenstein with whom we will talk about the Liechtenstein Family Foundation, their experiences over the years, and hopefully they will give us some insight of what we can expect in the coming decades, also here in Poland. So let us introduce our very special guests. Prince Michael of Liechtenstein is Executive Chairman of Industry and Finanzkontor, which is a leading company, trust company with a tradition and expertise in long-term and multi-generational preservation of wealth, family values, and businesses. Michael also is the founder and chairman of Geopolitical Intelligence Services, which is a consultancy company and information platform headquartered in Liechtenstein, as well as founder and publisher of the German print and online media, Der Pragmaticus. And in addition, Michael plays also serves as advisory board on the Foundation for Economic Governance and Public Law in Vaduz, Liechtenstein, and is a chairman of the board of directors of Liechtenstein Finance and member of the International Institute of Longevity, as well as chairman of the liberal think tank European Center of Austrian Economics Federation. Michael, welcome.
Thank you.
And our second guest is Princess Gisela of Liechtenstein, who is actively involved in relationship management and is managing director and CEO of Industry und Finanzkontor, a leading trust company, as Jacek already mentioned. She previously was vice president of Hanam & Partners, a boutique investment bank in London. Prior to this, she was active for several years in Canada, Singapore, and Switzerland, and she holds a bachelor and master degree in environmental engineering from the Federal Institute of Technology in Zurich, and she has completed the diploma program as certified fiduciary expert for Liechtenstein at the University of Liechtenstein. So, Gisela, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Guys, thank you very much for coming to Poland, and all the best for the 100th anniversary of the Liechtenstein Foundation. We also celebrate the anniversary, but it's only the third one in Poland, and we would like to discuss with you some similarities and differences between the two systems. And when our clients ask us, should we establish a family foundation in Poland or in Liechtenstein, the first comparison and the first difference that strikes them is that in Liechtenstein, you need a professional board member. You need someone who will sit on the board and manage the foundation. It is an external person. And when we were drafting, or when Kasia was actually drafting the Polish regulation for family foundations, this topic also came into spotlight, and we discussed whether we should have a professional board member in the Polish foundation. At the end, the parliament decided not to have that and to let the families govern their family foundations on their own. But in your legal system, which is 100 years old, you have this. You also have another difference as regards the board, meaning that the board can consist of legal persons. In Poland, it can only be natural persons that sits in the board. So looking at these two differences, what advantages do you see of your legal system?
I think there's the one advantage is of having a licensed board member is the compliance with regulations, tax law, especially on an international basis also, and ensuring the founder's wishes are adhered to. These topics are increasingly difficult nowadays. So this certainly adds a component of stability in a certain sense. And we have also seen in other jurisdictions where they didn't have a licensed person that ultimately the foundations sometimes became supervised by a regulator, which may make actually the functioning of a foundation a bit slower than one may wish for sometimes. So there is this advantage. Of course, nobody knows where Poland will go to in that direction. But at the same time, Liechtenstein, of course, also allows family members to sit on the board from a regulatory perspective. So this is possible. However, we actually seldom see it, unless in connection with Poland actually, because it does have a component in international law sometimes, which may lead to the impression of the regulators in the jurisdictions of beneficiaries or founders that the foundation is controlled. And this may, to a certain extent, impact the asset protection component. And at the same time, also, it may, over generations, lead to a certain conflict of interest if beneficiaries, for example, sit on the board and they may have a different view on what they would wish for than the founder's initial wishes. So there's a bit of a conflict of interest potential if it's governed this way, but one still has room also in Polish foundation law to work with different scenarios, and ultimately it's the founder's wish which is important. In terms of legal persons, maybe the last point, we've just seen in practice this is more of an administrative advantage, because whether it's licensed or not a legal person, sometimes if decisions and resolutions need to be taken quickly, it's easier to have a legal person with multiple directors being able to sign than a natural person who may be on vacation, have some other difficulty to be reachable. So this is more a practical point.
Or subject to an accident that you cannot foresee and not prepare before.
Yes.
Maybe there is also very strong this aspect that the Liechtenstein law, which is actually, if you want, a civil law version of the Anglo-Saxon trust, which looks very much at the separation between the control of the assets and the beneficiaries. So this is very so in the trust. It's normally not wished that the family or beneficiaries are represented, are trustees, because it defeats the purpose. And I think one of the characteristics is that the Liechtenstein Foundation has a lot of elements of the Anglo-Saxon trust, has actually some common law elements, also as a civil law jurisdiction. And I have the impression the Polish foundation, there is a little bit aspects of corporate law included. For instance, this assembly of the beneficiaries, which is not the case which we have in Liechtenstein.
Yes, and that is correct with the organs. And there's also another big issue and a big difference, I think, when it goes to secrecy and privacy versus what should be disclosed to public domain. And as you probably know, in the case of Polish family foundations, they are being registered, and that's obligatory. And in Liechtenstein legislation, you have the choice to register the foundation or not to register. So my first question would be, what is the difference and why some of the founders choose to have a registered foundation and the others quite the opposite? And what is better for the founder when he's still alive and for the next generations later on?
Indication is already given by how much foundations are actually registered opposed to unregistered, which is called deposited in Liechtenstein. And I would say, unless it's a public benefit foundation, they need to be registered. But the private benefit foundations, I think, can't be more than 10%, even less, because there's no clear-cut benefit, because beneficiaries do have information rights. However, if it's registered, there is an element of if somebody has proper interest, they have access to the articles, which the unregistered foundation you wouldn't have. And you need to go to the register to actually establish the foundation. With the unregistered ones, you don't. And you need to register all of the changes with the register, and they ultimately need to approve it. So it's also a bit slower. In terms of access, I mean, even the registered foundation in Liechtenstein, of course, the articles are public and so on, but there's not, I think there's still a bit less of public information, accessible information than in Poland, as I understand. But the preference is the unregistered one, because unless there's a, let's say, model comparison from an involved jurisdiction of a beneficiary, where the tax lawyer may say it's beneficial for a tax ruling, there's no clear benefit to having it registered aside from maybe an additional cost and additional persons having access to information to a certain extent.
And time.
Yes, but there are some rare cases where it makes sense. But of course, at the same time, we also have the beneficial owner register, as the EU countries
and
do.
yeah, that's
So
another
it's-
question, because well, in Poland it's accessible to everyone. So we have also very strict European rules to disclose the UBOs. And in case of Polish foundation, it's the founder, the members of the governing bodies, and all the beneficiaries who are entitled to receive benefits, even if they did not receive the benefits yet.
Yes.
So how does it work in Liechtenstein? Who is being registered as the UBO and when?
It's similar because we also follow the EU regulations, and as you know, next year we have a revision of the anti-money laundering regulations, so this will also be implemented, of course. So we do have the founder who's registered. We do also have the foundation council. If there's a controlling protector, it's this kind of an advisory board with control elements. He may also be registered, and ultimately also beneficiaries with a right to a distribution.
Okay, but if you have those beneficiaries who are not entitled yet, but they are foreseen as the future beneficiaries of the foundation with no rights, discretionary beneficiaries, do they need to be registered as well at the very beginning, or just after they receive the rights?
Actually, no, they don't need to be registered. What Liechtenstein does, you can have an abstract description of the circle of beneficiaries, which may be the founder and his descendants, and that's sufficient. Because from a practical standpoint, there's one aspect, some beneficiaries we cannot even reach out to. How would we even register them? There's a point of secrecy, and sometimes you may have a discretionary circle of beneficiaries, including over 100 people, so it's not even feasible. What we understand in other jurisdictions, there's a different view on this interpretation.
So yours is more practical when it goes to the administration, the whole process.
Yeah, but also, I mean, of course, access is limited. You need to have proven interest, and aside from, of course, regulators have access to it, and in form of international cooperation, there may be exchange of information, but it's not publicly available, that information.
That's a big difference with our Polish Family Foundation and our register of beneficial owners, which is accessible to everyone, actually.
Hopefully it will change in future. The next topic we would like to discuss is when you establish the foundation and transfer assets. The main difference between Poland and Liechtenstein is that in case you transfer assets to Liechtenstein, certain issues arise. The first issue are taxes, of course, because you transfer assets outside of Poland. So there are topics around exit tax and CFC, so controlled foreign corporations tax. And the other one is the level of control that the founder has over its foundation. In Poland, the Polish family foundations are very strictly supervised and controlled by the founder. In Liechtenstein, it's the opposite. So taking into account these two topics like taxes and the level of control, in which cases you would say a Liechtenstein family foundation would be something to consider for a Polish entrepreneur or for an entrepreneur from the wider CE region?
It depends, like all this, on a case to case. What did you want to do, and what you want to do in the future? If you think about, let's say, the long-term protection of assets, some generations, and also want to have a certain mobility in the family, it is certainly advantageous to have this separation, because otherwise it will always be allocated either by the tax authorities or, in case of a legal attack, it will be attached to the person who is controlling, because authorities look who is the actually person who is in control. So therefore, in Liechtenstein, and this is again a little bit like from the trust law, it is a separation from the assets. Now, this sounds very scary because you give it away, and that's why you have to put in the proper governance. And the governance comes from two sides. You can see how do you select the people who are making decisions, how do you select, let's say, controlling person like the protectors, who have certain rights, like of consent or veto. And what is also in Liechtenstein, which is a very strong thing, but it's also important, the beneficiaries have an unlimited right of information and also a right to sue. And the Liechtenstein courts are very used to handle such cases. And so the protection is there. So it really depends what you want to do. If you look less on this separation and mobility, and you really want to control it, it is advantageous a system like the system in Poland. If you want to have more independence, personal independence and protection, I think you need to do this a proper separation.
Our another question will be about succession and succession planning and how the foundations may help in it. We lately launched the Polish edition of PwC Global Family Business Survey, and well, there were probably not surprising results for us, but it said that 31% of Polish family businesses still don't have a clear succession planning. And more than half of them have not worked out the basic family governance. They believe that it looks different, much different than with the families that you work with. And a lot of high net worth individuals are using the family foundations to plan their succession and create some kind of family governance. And a lot of them are using the Liechtenstein Foundation. So what do you think? What lays behind the success of the family foundations, private foundations as such? And does it really help in creating and establishing that family governance that will last for generations?
I think the one aspect is of having some sort of rules and understanding and communication when it comes to succession. And the advantage of a foundation is it's not just for the next generation, but it can be for multiple generations, and really put into words the founder's wishes for the long term, hold together the assets, and by having these types of, they don't need to be strict rule, but kind of flexible rules and understandings, it helps to keep the assets together, for them not to be split apart, to be held in one vehicle, however still having the family involved maybe in operations or as beneficiaries and so on. This is very useful. In Liechtenstein, probably the success, of course, aside from 100 years, this gives some sort of legal certainty, of course. It's been through the courts, the rules are clear. Our law there was one revision of the foundation law in 2008, but it was more about information rights for the beneficiaries and no substantial changes. So really the law has been in place for a long time. And the jurisdiction itself, the law allows a lot of flexibility. So you can create supervisory organs, you can create a protector, you can create an advisory board. The powers are not prescribed by law. There's a lot of flexibility of what you can work with, which actually has been the success of the Family Foundation in Liechtenstein, and why it was so attractive to many, because we've seen other jurisdictions introduce the law and then making a lot of changes very quickly after they've introduced it, which introduces a lot of legal uncertainty when you're trying to plan for many generations. And of course, in terms of the country itself, it's stable, it's neutral, we don't have any debt, so there's no, let's say, threat of infringement of property rights. There's a lot of stability to the country itself, and it is compliant with international laws. A lot of jurisdictions that traditionally have been sought for in terms of holding entities and so on have had a lot of pressure when it comes to being compliant. And Liechtenstein has been and puts it at the forefront to ensure that it's also stable jurisdictions for families that look to set up their vehicles there. Okay. I don't know, is there anything to...
No, I think it's just that many family businesses don't think about succession. That's not just in Poland. This is a general. This is a general aspect. But then it is important that families who are interested to go with a good succession, that they also look at the governance. And it mostly comes out if a family feels that wealth is also responsibility. It is easier to get in a governance and a working foundation. If the idea is just I want to have as much cash out of the business as possible, then it's getting very difficult.
Great. It's good to hear that it's not only the Poland that have the still struggling with that. However, we have just this first generational big change, so we're still getting the experience in that.
Yeah, but we see that working on the statutes of a family foundation is also an opportunity for the family to think about topics like family governance, sometimes for the very first time. Okay, guys, you not only manage the family foundations, the private foundations for others, but you are also yourself a family business. And Michael, you have taken over this business many years ago. And over the past years, you have introduced your daughter Gisela to the management board, and this is also a succession story in your family. Could you tell us more about this?
Let's put it this way. I've grown this business. I have worked on it. I have two daughters. I never wanted to force anybody in there, because it's not good if you have to run a business which you don't feel that you should run. So I had also hoping that one of them would do it, but I had also the plan B if there wouldn't be a possibility. So I was thinking about it. Now I came into the lucky position that I had one daughter who was interested to do that, and who was ready to come back to Liechtenstein to take that over. And I think we have now a very good collaboration. And I think what is important also, that you really also hand over the responsibilities and the functions so that the next generation can also freely work.
So what we see here in Poland is that when you hand over the responsibilities, the founder needs some additional activities to make his life full and to occupy the time that is suddenly free. So what was your story here?
Well, I have a lot. You read a few things I'm doing, so I'm kept pretty busy. But still, sort of my main concern is still Industry- und Finanzkontor, but more in a role that I'm a sounding board for my daughter, and I look after clients which I have since one client even in the fourth generation now.
Okay, so you didn't step back yet.
I stepped back to a certain sense. I'm not leading anymore operationally. This is all Gisela's responsibility, but I do some work. Sort of basically, she is, to a certain extent, she's my boss when I'm working in the company.
Okay, so Gisela, how does it look from your perspective? Well, your sister is not involved in the business. Do you have like any fear that there might be a conflict between you and her that can affect the business? Or you have that all settled and both of you are doing what you're really willing to do, and so you have a kind of a common acceptance on the whole situation?
We see many families, I mentioned it before, it's important to have some kind of rules and communication of how things should work in a certain sense, whether they're written or unwritten. And let's say we come from a bit of a traditional family, so for me it was always clear that my elder sister would have the first choice. A little of the old traditional. Every family in Asset has to find their own rules, but this is something which it's not written for us.
She was first to the throne, yeah?
She was, exactly. So for me it was clear. And so I built my own career because, of course, I was always still close to the business, but for me it was clear there was a first choice. And then I could even start thinking about it, but first I built my career. So when my sister then decided that she doesn't want to do it because she has very interesting interests elsewhere and would prefer a different asset basket, let's say it so, I was very happy to actually be allowed to fill the role. Of course, it would also have to be my father's choice, but so it was very easy for us to do this, or at least for me, because I never had the feeling that I had a right to the position, but more of, yes, I could take the opportunity once certain steps were taken. And I think it ultimately came down to the communication, which was always very open, a certain kind of values, rules. It's not a right, it's a responsibility you come into. And ultimately, it was always clear to us we would have to build our own careers, because you can never be certain that there is a succession, because from history we all know there's wars, there's expropriation, there's all kinds of things that can happen. So everybody needs to be able to hold up on their own, which is obviously important for any family.
So you came back to your father's business after many years working outside of Liechtenstein and not in the family business. You had the experience in the bank, investment bank and so on. How was it for you? Was it crucial for your reputation among the employees? And was it helpful, or would you recommend other next gens to do that, or they should start from the beginning with their parents' business?
It depends on the business and it depends on the family. For me, it came natural. Of course, I was always close to the business, and I think employees respect you if they see they make an effort, they are important to you. You respect the stakeholders, which employees are. And in any family business, usually the family is very close to the people that work in the company. They're very important to the family. And I think it comes very natural in that respect, whether you come after a few years or whether you are there from the start. I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but I think both work, and it sometimes also very much depends on the type of business and the size.
I think both. It depends on the personalities, depends on the families, depends on nature. So both sides have its merits.
Okay, so there's again not an easy answer, but if you would think of few things that you could share with the nestors and the successors, how should they approach the process? Like some pro tips for them from your perspective.
I think the one, and you can add, but the one thing that I mentioned is clear communication. Actually, everybody knowing there are certain types of values or rules, not too detailed rules. Detailed rules don't work over generations. Flexible ones to a certain extent. And also this innate understanding that wealth is not a right, it's a responsibility. And I think once one understands that, there's less possibility of fighting within the family. There are rules. It's not a right. It's a responsibility, and there's not much that we as an advisor can do to that. But education, of course, from a young age, is an important factor in ensuring that and independence.
I think what's very important, if the next generation comes in also in a leading position, they have to give an example in work ethics, in dedication, and so getting respect from the collaborators, respect also from other stakeholders, not because it's from the family, but because of the way the work is addressed and the position is fulfilled.
And of course, I mean, this communication, as you initially mentioned, sometimes it helps to actually work on articles of a foundation to think about these things for the next generations also, to think about the set of governance, what would the family actually like to see, what is the purpose of the assets, what is, as you mentioned it's sometimes a good first step.
Yeah. There are also some families who prefer, and it can also make sense, that the family is not involved in the business directly. And they say, actually, we should step back. We still have the responsibility, but let's say, if you want to keep the business, maybe industrial business in the family, and you have 3 children and one wants to be a medical doctor and one wants this and that, it's sometimes better than to separate family from management functions.
So to save the wealth for the generations and let everybody be happy with what they choose to be happy with.
Yeah, or try to keep them as happy as possible.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. It's not every day that you can host a prince and princess in Poland, so it was a privilege. Also, again, congratulations on the 100 years of your private foundation. We hope that many Polish clients will reach out to Liechtenstein as a destination where they can plan their succession and protect their wealth. So thanks again, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we hope for the next 97 years of the Polish Foundation.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.